Hello and welcome to Hindsight with me, Segun Ojumu. Now, last week on the program, Nigeria's Minister of Foreign Affairs was here with me. Part of what we discussed on that program was the UN Secretary General Designate Antonio Guterres. I asked the minister to set the agenda for Mr. Guterres, but more on that later on. Let's serve you with some news making the headlines globally. The Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, has praised UN staff members who are on the front lines of disaster and violence and continue to respond to the plight of the vulnerable people across the world. Mr. Ban's statement came during his last United Nations Day message on Monday. The day was observed annually on October the 24th, the anniversary of the entry into force of the 1945, I should say, of the UN Charter. He noted further that the UN has put in place some solid foundations for shared progress, which must be built on by working even harder to empower women, engage youth, and uphold human rights for all. Mr. Ban said major progress has been made towards a more sustainable future through the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, as well as in addressing the threat of climate change through the Paris Agreement, which will enter into force on November the 4th, a record entry for any such global accord. The UN chief further expressed that it was an honor to serve the world's people over the past 10 years and called on everyone to support the Secretary General Designate Antonio Guterres in continuing the organization's global mission of peace, sustainable development, and human rights. Mr. Ban's tenure as the UN Secretary General comes to a close at the end of this year. Let's take you now to Pakistan, where at least 59 cadets and guards have been killed after militants attacked a police college in the Pakistani city of Quetta. Officials say 3 militants wearing suicide bomb vests entered the college late on Monday, reportedly taking hostages. A major security operation lasted for hours and all attackers were killed. No group has said it carried out the assault, but Quetta has seen similar attacks by separatists and Islamist militants in recent years. Hundreds of trainees were evacuated from Balochistan Police College as troops arrived to repel the militants. Local media reported at least 3 explosions at the scene. The police academy is home to hundreds of students, and many of the cadets who died were killed in the blast. I should add here that this assault has clearly highlighted the woes of Pakistan's southwestern city of Quetta, not just because of the heavy casualties, but because it came on the very day a judicial commission investigating an earlier attack held its first hearing. The attack in August was carried out on a soft target, the emergency ward of a hospital. The militants have now hit a symbol of the state, though some still consider police to be a softer target in a region where law enforcement has largely slid under the control of the military. It all comes against the backdrop of heightened tensions between Pakistan and its 2 neighbors, India and Afghanistan. A top military official claims these attackers had handlers in Afghanistan. But many will point to Pakistan's own alleged use of militants as a state policy, which they say has now started to backfire. Northern Balochistan has been home to Afghan Taliban, who have had long-standing links not only to elements within the Pakistani establishment, but also to Al-Qaeda and Pakistani Taliban groups that have since turned against Islamabad. And now to an election that the whole world is watching, the race for the White House. Let's take you to the key battleground state of Florida, where polling stations have opened for early voting and where Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump remain in a tight race. Mr. Trump is blitzing the state with 5 rallies, while Mrs. Clinton is also swinging through the Sunshine State. Every early voting by mail began in Florida weeks ago, with over 1 million people having already cast their votes. Mrs. Clinton holds a narrow 3-point lead over Mr. Trump in Florida, according to a new CBS YouGov poll. The former Secretary of State had 46% of the vote compared with Mr. Trump's 43%, the poll found. Recent polls have put Mrs. Clinton well ahead of our Republican rival, both nationally and in several battleground states. A new CNN ORC national poll puts Mrs. Clinton 6 points ahead among likely voters at 51% to 45% in a head-to-head with Mr. Trump. Polling in Republican strongholds, including Arizona, Georgia, and Utah, have also shown closer than expected races. But speaking at a rally in St. Augustine on Monday, Mr. Trump said, and I quote him, "Folks, we're winning, we're winning, we're winning." End of quote. He once again blamed the media which he described as being composed of thieves and crooks and almost as crooked as Hillary, and said the system is, quote, corrupt, rigged, and broken, end of quote. Pollsters also came under fire with Mr. Trump claiming the hacked emails of John Podesta showed the Clinton campaign chair was rigging the polls by oversampling Democrats. The Republican nominee also hit out at his rival's use of personal email server, while Secretary of State saying the FBI and the Justice Department had inappropriately left her off the hook. We have to investigate the investigation, he said. Classic Trump there. Now, let's turn our attention to the United Nations, shall we? Because Mr. Guterres, when he comes in to office next year, will be inheriting a plethora of crises, some of them similarly intractable. There is Syria, there is Iraq, and then the aftermath of natural disasters in different parts of the world. The man in question here is quite clear about what his objectives are. For him, peace is the most pressing agenda. Take a listen.
The multiplication of conflicts we are witnessing, because peace is also something essential to limit the growth of these terrible terrorist developments we are witnessing. Unfortunately, all these conflicts, Syria, Iraq, but also Yemen, Afghanistan, Libya, Nigeria, Mali, all these conflicts are interlinked, and they are linked with global terrorism. You see fighters coming from all over and going to different of these countries, and you see terrorists coming from there, and also terrorists that are motivated by these conflicts in the countries where they live. And so to end these conflicts is also a way to put an end, or at least to strongly limit these dramatic terrorist developments we have witnessed in the recent past. So this will be my main concern, to work with member states strongly, to convene, to bring people together, to try to address the problems of global peace and global security. And of course, in this context, I have to say the priority is in Syria. Syria is the most dramatic of all the conflicts, and in which the people is suffering more than anywhere else. What the Secretary General can do is, with his good offices, he's not the leader of the world, he's not the president of the world, is with humility, as you said, but with determination. What he can do is to try to bring together those countries that have an influence in the parties to the conflict, and help make them understand that this is a conflict in which nobody is winning, everybody is losing. And the people is suffering tremendously, but the stability of the region is being put seriously into question. See what happened in Iraq. And this conflict is triggering terrorist activities all over the world. And so I think there is much more to unite all states to stop this war than the eventual benefits that they might think they can obtain in a conflict that will never end and in which everybody will be losing. And I hope to help people understand this, and I hope to cooperate with member states to try to bring them together and working together to try to overcome these terrible difficulties that we have been witnessing in Syria as in other parts of the world.
But that is not the only thing Mr. Guterres will be concerning himself with if this next clip is anything to go by, because in a recent interview with the UN News Center, he spoke about his strong commitment to gender equality, highlighting the empowerment and protection of women and girls. As a central priority, Mr. Guterres also expressed hope for the world body to reach gender parity at all levels in the nearest possible future. Watch this.
What I can do is to make sure that for the organization, first of all, in everything we do around the world, the empowerment and the protection of women and girls is a central priority. And second, that we work inside the organization to reach parity between men and women at all levels in the nearest possible future. So, as I said, I cannot do anything about my gender, but I can have a very strong commitment to gender equality in everything related to the United Nations.
Let's stay with Mr. Guterres a little while longer, shall we? Because as he prepares to succeed Ban Ki-moon in January as UN Secretary General, he's also calling for full solidarity with refugees and migrants. Still in that interview with the UN News Center following his appointment, the former UN refugee chief said countries should look into migration from a humane point of view to better provide for and protect the rights of refugees and migrants. He also called for more effective regulation and better cooperation among countries of origin, transit and destination.
To make sure that countries are able to respect not only international law, but to assume their full solidarity with those in need of protection that are fleeing those horrible conflicts we are witnessing will be, of course, a priority. And also to look into migration from a humane point of view and recognizing that migration is part of the solution of the global problems. It only needs to be effectively regulated. It only needs to be based on the cooperation among states, not to have people dying and at the same time those smugglers and traffickers prospering, those criminal gangs prospering, because there is no effective cooperation among countries of origin, countries of transit, countries of destination, and migration is not considered as one of the natural elements in which the world solves its problems.
We'll take a short break now, but when we return, I'll be asking the Minister of Foreign Affairs to set the agenda for the UN Secretary General Designate Antonio Guterres. Please stay with us.
Watching Silverbird Television.
The point is this, is the executive branch. The president has...
Me, Shegun Ojomo. On this program, we'll be bringing you news, views, and exclusive interviews.
Not political will to bring back people, our medical experts are on diaspora.
Raise the efforts so far.
The synergy that has been developed.
Arrived Abuja from Washington, D.C., where he joined President Barack Obama.
The cause of the economic recession was over. Now, Senator Saki in an interactive...
to capture the moment for in-house in session. From the national...
Welcome back. Now, before we went on that break, I told you that the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Shefron Yama, has been setting the agenda for the UN Secretary General Designate Antonio Guterres. Watch that interview.
I would say, well, clearly, from Nigeria's perspective and Africa's perspective, being very selfish, putting more money into peacekeeping.
Okay.
The UN funds peacekeeping operations around Africa. A lot of African countries, we have economic challenges now, the African Union, and we don't really have the resources. And we don't really want outsiders, relying on other countries. So that would be number one. I think clearly peacekeeping. Reforming the UN, the Security Council, would be another one, a major challenge. Clearly, I think investing probably more money, UN money, in development. We have the Sustainable Development Goals, which is a UN initiative, and they're very ambitious and covering a lot of sectors. I would also say a much more direct UN engagement with developing countries in implementing those UN those SDGs, and it means investing more money. I would also say giving more jobs to Nigerians,
obviously,
in the UN, and appointing Nigerians to high-level positions. Maybe his Deputy Secretary General, for instance.
Okay, and the last point.
Wow, and the last point would probably be to beef up the UN presence in Nigeria. Yeah.
Now, when talking about the defining moments of the year, the historic visit of President Barack Obama to Cuba for a 3-day visit will certainly be in the top 10. President Barack Obama became the first sitting U.S. president to visit since the 1959 revolution, which heralded decades of hostility between the two countries. Mr. Obama said change will happen in Cuba, and that Cuban President Raul Castro understood that. Now, that resolution was adopted by the 93-member General Assembly with 190 votes in favor. Israel, as you would expect, joined its ally, the United States, in voting no. while such resolutions are non-binding, they can carry political weight. President Obama has taken steps to ease trade and travel restrictions on Cuba, but only the U.S. Congress can lift the full trade embargo. Now, a year later, there's also that matter is due to be discussed at the United Nations General Assembly in about 48 hours from now. This subject matter was part of discussions I had with the ambassador of Cuba to Nigeria, Carlos Trejo Sosa. On the 27th of October last year, the United Nations, as we talked about earlier, 193 member countries renewed the call for the United States to lift the embargo, the economic embargo on your country. Yes. But that hasn't happened. Do you feel, how powerless do you feel?
Well, on the 26th of this year, so one day before, it will be discussed again, the Cuban project of a resolution calling for an end, an unconditionally end of the embargo on Cuba. And then we are sure that we would achieve a very, very large and impressive majority in that. So the last time, only 2 countries voted against the United States and Israel. And we don't know how it's going to happen, how it's going to vote the United States this year, because President Obama recognized and acknowledged that the embargo is a reminiscence of the
past,
of the Cold War.
Cold War, yeah, and the Cold War has ended.
Ended more than 30 years ago, and the embargo is still in place. So he acknowledged that the embargo was a failure because the embargo did not do anything of what they wanted to do. And so he appealed to the Congress to remove the embargo completely. So if the president is appealing to remove the embargo, he acknowledges that the embargo is obsolete, that it is doing nothing but to affect the Cuban population. And then how is the American government going to vote on the 26th of October? If the president says the embargo should be lifted, and he appealed to the Congress to lift completely the embargo, and then how is he going to vote? So you are against or are in favor? So it's a decision he has to take.
Okay.
And it is needed because it is affecting Cuba very, very, very much. Of course, we acknowledge that President Obama have made significant steps towards the easing of measures of the embargo, but he can still do much more. There are at least 18 issues which could be done by executive powers of his without consulting the Congress. The Congress, which is in the hands of the Republicans. And there are some people there say no, although there's now a good amount of members from the Republican and the Democrats Democrats who are in favor of lifting the embargo because they are, shooting their own feet.
There have been many visitors to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs lately. Now, this perhaps is a signal to the fact that Nigeria's foreign partners are eager to do business with it. Italy has sent a delegation, as have Iceland, France, Spain, and Germany. The latest to come calling last Friday were the Portuguese. The Portuguese delegation was led by Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs and Cooperation, Teresa Ribeiro. The Portuguese Secretary of State told Nigeria's Minister of State for Foreign Affairs her country wants an agreement on double taxation finalized. Now, she also said Portugal is in the process of finalizing an investment protection agreement. Here's more on that for you.
I know that Nigeria is very focused on ITs, that you won't really advance in a knowledge-based society, and you are working a lot on that. And this is the reason why I think, yes, we need to enlarge our cooperation sectors. We need to work to get this really on the ground and to have tangible results. We would like very much to have this agreement on avoidance of double taxation finalized as soon as possible. This could be an important signal for our investors that want to come to Nigeria, together with the agreement on investment protection. We are finalizing this from our side. You already ratified this, so we are just finalizing from our side in order to align this with our obligations and commitments regarding the European Union. But as far as this process is concluded, we are going to ratify this, and I'm sure that the entry into force of these two instruments, together with the flight connection, will give the boost we need for improving our relations. So,
and that ends Hindsight for this week. Thank you for watching. Let's keep the conversation going. Connect with us on Twitter at HindsightSTV and email us on hindsightstv@gmail.com. I am Shegun Ojumu. See you again next week. Bye for now.